Welcome to the Football Chris Show, where my name fits conveniently in the initials.
That was a disgusting performance.
On this show, we cover the hottest topics around the FCS each and every week.
Yeah, it's my job to get them ready. I'm running around like trying to get them jacked up.
If you could do us a favor, if you're listening in podcast form, could you please leave us a 5-star rating?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, bud.
I think in general it was a pretty uninspired day.
If you're watching on YouTube and Sam Herder hates your team, leave us a like and smash the subscribe button.
If you call Nick Nick, you know you get cussed out on the spot, so don't do that. Treat me like Nick.
Oh, and one last thing before you enjoy the show.
What I say for you? Tell them to bring me my money.
This show is an affiliate show of FCS Fans Nation Network.
I'm going to be as frank as I can be. I'm glad it's over.
Welcome in. Today we are covering the Southern Conference, one of the oldest conferences, not just in the FCS, but in all of college football. It's over 100 years old. And to help me cover that, I couldn't think of anybody better to bring in than Kevin Marshall at FCS Nation Radio 1. Kevin, how are you?
Very good. And I've been wanting to do this for a long time. So since this is an FCS Fans Nation affiliate show, I just figured I would do this. You know, the FCC tends to frown on this sort of a thing, you know, so it's Matthew Frazee's world. We're just all trying to live in it, right?
Exactly. Our YouTube overlords apparently don't draw the line on cracking of cans. Well, makes it great.
Scepter IPA from DraftWorks in Missoula, right here.
Gotta love beer from Montana. So let's get into the opposite side of the country from Montana. Let's get into the Southern Conference. You and I have done a show previously. I'll have it up in the cards for everybody, talking about, I think I called it the Ghost of the SoCon, and kind of the history of, like, you know, how most of the SEC, a lot of the ACC have roots in this conference. This conference is old. It doesn't do a lot of expanding. And if it does, it's very well thought out expanding. And with that, you have a lot of like-minded institutions. But with that, you also have a huge array of institutions where you have like ETSU, which has something like 30,000 students. And then you have something like the Citadel or VMI, where you're looking at a couple thousand. It's wild to see the wide array that this conference has, but all still kind of that soul, I guess. Like watching the SoCon Media Days, which we're going to get into the state of the conference, it felt like a proper media day, which I just covered the ASUN with Will Seiler. That felt rushed. The SoCon Media Days feels a lot more like a traditional media day where you have all the coaches come up, a very knowledgeable host asking all these coaches it. And, you know, it's at the Omni Hotel in Asheville, North Carolina, a beautiful facility. It was really cool to watch. And once again, just be reminded of the history of this conference and sometimes how wide open it can be. So with that, Kevin, I kind of want to talk. Nobody better. What is the state of the conference? How is the SoCon today? And what are some of your takeaways from Media Day?
Well, look, I think with all the changing that's taken place, and some people just seem to expand for the sake of expanding, you know, because everybody else was doing it, they felt like they had to as well. But whenever I would say that to my daddy growing up, I'd say, well, you know, everybody else is doing it. He would say, well, if everybody was jumping off the Cooper River Bridge, would you jump off the Cooper River Bridge too? That's a big bridge connecting Mount Pleasant and downtown Charleston. So the SoCon right now is like a very well-dressed gentleman with a glass of bourbon and a cigar sitting on a couch, puffing on that and taking a sip while everything is chaos around them. I got so many direct messages, so many text messages, so much from people outside of that league that, you know, Chattanooga's going to the ASUN, Mercer's unhappy. And I would just sit back and go, you know, none of that is true. And one of the things that the Southern Conference did do after the Wayward Sisters in Georgia and in Boone, North Carolina, made their way up was, you know, they made the exit fee $2 million. So if you want out the SoCon, you know, we'll let you go, but man, it's going to hurt. So, And I think one of the things that has helped that stability is how good the basketball has been in the last 4, 5, 6 years. The SoCon is a top half basketball conference as well. So obviously, bringing ETSU back helped with that. VMI has really good basketball too, surprisingly. So the basketball has helped. It's a good baseball conference too. So, from top to bottom in the SoCon, just like you said, you have schools that really don't seem to have a lot in common on paper, but it works, and it always has. It's always been a conference where, you have some large publics who have come and parked there for a while and then moved on to somewhere else. But we talked about this the last time you had me on, Chris, that you would think that, your large public schools that are in there now, your Chattanoogas, your Western Carolinas, your East Tennessee States, would have all the advantages and that they would dominate the league. But that isn't how it really works in the SoCon. There's something special about being a football player at the Citadel or at VMI that people outside the footprint of the South will never understand. How'd they get that guy? Because, maybe granddaddy went there, or maybe somebody sees the value in the networking of wearing the ring from one of those two schools that, you just don't get when you're looking at it from other parts of the country. But the state of the league is strong. The leadership is okay. I wish that they would do more with social media and promoting the league. Look, I am one of the people that loves this league more than just about anybody else does, but I also criticize it more than just about anybody else does. And, that's with any long-term relationship, that type of thing's going to be there. But this league is good from top to bottom. Anybody can beat anybody in any sport at any time. And it's a beautiful thing. We talked off the air that I think the Big Sky is starting to get to that as well. With Idaho State's only conference win last year being over UC Davis, who was a ranked team. That usually doesn't happen in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. Indiana State doesn't beat NDSU. That in some leagues that can happen. And yes, it's a double-edged sword, because if we want to have multiple teams in the FCS playoffs, you kind of need somebody to go 8-0. And then have two teams behind them, maybe three, who are, can reach that threshold to where they'll be considered for at-large bids. I think the last time that happened was the Citadel in 2016. And that year we had 3 teams in the playoff. So the parity is one of the great things about the league, but it's also one of the things that keeps us from, putting 3-4 teams in the playoffs every year.
Yeah, and you really touched on it. Some things that Commissioner Schaus talked about. One is he talked about how top to bottom, this is the most competitive league in the country. And we've talked about it. I think that is true, because one of the gripes, and you talked about it, is anybody can beat anybody, which sucks, because then a lot of them beat each other up. And maybe then in the playoffs eyes, depending on how out of conference scheduling goes, which something is literally kind of an internet, kind of like the Kibby Dome is an internet meme. SoCon weekend is an internet meme for the SEC, where there's that one weekend where they schedule all the SoCon teams. So yeah, it's hard when most SoCon teams aren't going to get wins in that weekend against Alabama and Auburn, and they do get some, but it's harder to gauge, the playoffs on that point, which was something that Commissioner Schaus also talked about with. They need to get back to having multiple bids, because last year it was a 1-bid league, and you touched on it. It wasn't too long ago where it was a 3-bid league, even more so, 4 bids. So, in your opinion, is the SoCon this year a multi-bid league?
Well, I'm a giant homer, Chris, and this hasn't happened yet. So, yes, my friend. It totally
we're journalism adjacent here. We're allowed to be fans.
Right. Look, man, I'm not a journalist, dude. I mean, I was a fan first, and that's what I'll always be. And
exactly.
That's why when we do the show, I mean, you listen more than one time, where the biases are. and we freely admit it,
Yep.
So, but look, just like I said just a moment ago, you need someone to dominate the league. And I just don't see that happening. There's look, nobody wants to play Western Carolina. I'll tell you that right now. They went on a roll towards the end of the season. Kerwin Bell's a great coach. He's the best head coach who ever spiked a ball in the CFL off his own jimmies and then got hit after it. If you've never seen that video, it's outstanding. Scores a touchdown, spikes the ball, hits himself, and then gets shoved by a DB after it's over. It's glorious. But he's an excellent coach, did very well at Valdosta. But he brought his quarterback with him last year, who had been in that system for 6 years. And he did extremely well. Western's going to score a lot of points. The only question is, just like Samford, is can they stop anybody? So nobody wants to play Western Carolina because you're going to have to score 38, 42 points to beat them. So you have Western, and Samford. And, look, I've been as critical of Samford Bulldog football as anybody. I mean, Chris Hatcher is supposedly an offensive genius, but nobody in FCS football has done less with more in the last 7-8 years than Samford. They've put some dudes into Sunday football, Bradbury, and, some DBs. Duck Hodges had his nice little run with the Steelers, and they won exactly jack. And this is the same Chris Hatcher that longtime SoCon fans will recall this. It took him 2 seasons to realize when he was the head coach at Georgia Southern that Jason Foster was the best quarterback he had. And he switches him back to quarterback, and he immediately wins the Peyton Award. But Hatcher spent 2 seasons trying to make him a receiver or an A-back. So, genius, probably not. But we need someone to dominate the league, and I just don't see that happening. I think this is probably a 2, possibly 3 big league this year, depending upon how things shake out. But if you want to be one of those 3 teams, you can't lose to Wofford. Which Wofford's going to be better. You can't, if you're one of those teams, if you have a shot, win and you're in situation like Chattanooga had the last week of the season last year, you can't lose to the Citadel at home. But that's what the league's all about. Everything on the line for Chattanooga, nothing but pride on the line for the Citadel. And God knows nobody has more pride than that school. Pride in a lot of things they ought not to have pride in if you look at the current way things work in the world. But, the only people that were shocked that happened to Chattanooga the last week of the season are people who have never followed the SoCon before. And I think that your colleague, Jamie Williams, he's always been really high on Mercer. And, this could be Mercer's year. Although I did confirm yesterday that their All-American running back, Fred Davis, not going to play this year due for personal reasons, which is a blow for them. But Mercer, Bobby Lamb built that program up. And, Lamb, did some pretty good coaching jobs at Furman when he was there. And, won a national championship at Furman as the starting quarterback in 1988. So, good FCS guy, good head coach, good man too. But, the people in Macon are becoming a little impatient, Chris Hammond. They restart the program. They're successful in the Pioneer, moved to the SoCon, and they weren't bad, but they were, a score away in 3-4 ball games from being, in that mix. Last year, they were in that mix until the last day of the season at East Tennessee State, or the week before last week of the season at ETSU. So the people in Macon are becoming a bit impatient. They have great support, beautiful little stadium, and Macon's is a nice little town, and they want a winner. And I hope for their sake that Coach Cronick is the guy. I think he might be. He's won everywhere he's been. I think this may be the year that Jamie Williams is quite pleased, and that Mercer takes a step forward. And and we talked about him before, but Matthew Fraser, and Kyle O'Neill's favorite team in the SoCon's Furman. My least favorite. But Furman is a team that They're not going to wow you offensively, which was why it was kind of odd that, when Randy Sanders retired from East Tennessee State, that ETSU hired George Quarles, who was the Furman offensive coordinator. Furman hasn't been exactly lighting up the scoreboard the last 2-3 years. Now, they had quarterback issues, and that was most of the reason why. But they bring in Quarles at ETSU, and his job, it's just like when I had Joe Glenn on when he was at South Dakota. And we talked about him when he got the job at Montana. And he said that he had to ignore his initial thoughts, which were, I'm going to do things my way. And then he said, finally, he realized that he wasn't the smartest man in the world, and he was being handed the keys to a G5 freaking jet, and it was only his job not to crash it. And if you're George Quarles, that's what you need to do at ETSU. You don't have to reinvent anything there because it's there. And
a lot of good players.
I think even the NDSU people will say that, that playoff game didn't go the way the Bucks wanted it to. But it had been a minute since somebody from another conference had come into that dome and matched them physically. They didn't get shoved around. And, that's a credit to the SoCon. That's what the league is known for, is that it's a physical league. You're going to get beat up every Saturday. The finesse, people have tried it, Samford, and it really doesn't work. On fourth down and a foot, you've got to be able to line up in the I formation and get a foot. You're not going to have all that much success getting in the shotgun and handing the ball to the guy 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage in that case.
So not a fan of the VMI air raid?
Look, when I had Coach Wackenheim on, before the spring season started, I asked him, what makes you different than the Citadel? Army, Navy, Air Force, who all run some version of the option. And he said that where they're located, it's such a recruiting hotbed that he can go out and find a quarterback in the Tidewater of Virginia who can sling it around the field. And you can find receivers up there who have played in that style of offense. And he said it was much easier, he thought, where VMI is located, to bring those guys in than it is to selectively recruit for a system that limits what you can do. Yeah. So, and I think he's right. And I'm not a fan of the air raid, but I am a fan of, a guy coming in up there in Lexington, Virginia, and taking a program that has been completely irrelevant in the SoCon, for just about as long as I've been alive, and then making them into something that you don't want to face on Saturdays. Wackenheim's done a fantastic job. And to be quite frank with you, Chris, I'm surprised he's still there. Mike Houston comes to Citadel, wins the Southern Conference Championship in 15, makes them competitive in 14, beats South Carolina and wins the SoCon in 15, and he's off to James Madison.
Yep.
And now, wins the chipper at James Madison, and he's off to East Carolina, which I'm still not sure East Carolina is a better job than James Madison. But I know it probably pays a little more, or it did at the time.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of surprised Wackenheim is still there. Maybe VMI has found somebody who is like willing to be their Mike Ayers. Mike Ayers, look, coaching job at Clemson in South Carolina was open numerous times in the 30 years Ayers was at Wofford. And he takes Wofford from where they were to winning SoCon championships, going to the FCS playoffs, getting to the semifinals a year, being a team nobody wanted to play, and you can't sniff an interview at Clemson or Carolina. I mean, just not sexy enough, I guess. But Ayers never applied for any of those jobs. He was very happy to be the head coach at Wackenheim. And I think maybe VMI found that in Wackenheim. Let's hope so. I don't dislike them, except for one weekend out of the year. I mean, it ain't like Furman, who, even though my mother went there, man, there's something about that purple and that pretty little school with the fountain that turns me just absolutely as red as my beard used to be. Now there's, gray in there. But, man, something about that place just irks me and irks anybody who's ever spent a second on the banks of the Ashley River at El Cid, that's for sure.
So a couple more state of the conference things real quick. One of the things that the commissioner talked about was the improvement in game day atmosphere. You touched on it. You'd like to see maybe a little bit of an improvement on the, let's call it lead up to game days. Like you said, the social media stuff, post players of the week. Like, it's no secret. We covered it in the Big Sky breakdown. Big Sky's outperforming every G5 according to School Sparks.
Perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah, they do an amazing job. In the Ivy Leagues, one of the other schools that has really good social media engagement. You look at something like the Ivy, something like the Big Sky. The SoCon's footprint isn't much different than those two conferences. Lots of old schools, lots of tradition, lots of proud alumni where those schools aren't necessarily their second choices. They are first choice schools. Kids in Montana don't dream to go to UW. They dream to go to Montana. You grew up in Idaho. You wanted to go to U of I, Idaho State, maybe Boise State. But, there's not a lot of they are first pick schools, which is something that isn't said in some of the other conferences around the country, maybe less so in the Dakotas. But, if you live in Ohio, unfortunately for Youngstown State fans, you probably want to go to the Ohio State more than you want to go to Youngstown.
Stop that
right?
slander, Chris. Stop that slander now. Come on now. I can tell when you're trying to dig at me a little bit, bro. And that one kind of hits me where it hurts a little bit, but I get what you're saying. And, the game day atmosphere.
If they tried, there would be engagement on the social media side.
Yes. And, sometimes, there's several guys, SoCon guys, who do pretty well with engagement on Twitter, and if you put them in charge, it don't have to be me, although that would certainly be something I would be perfectly willing to look into, but it don't have to be me. But I swear, if you took Cole Spivey and, some of the ETSU fan groups or whatever and put them in charge, it would quadruple what they're doing now. But
it's
yes,
good to see improvement. It's good to see improvement to game day atmospheres, right? But part of the game day atmosphere is the build up to the game day.
Correct.
And I definitely feel like the SoCon, especially in this, let's say, power vacuum that's possibly about to occur with the CAA probably being very uncompetitive here in the next couple of years in terms of national. You really have Delaware, maybe New Hampshire can get back. But it's like the SoCon seems like that conference, either that or it's going to be like the ASUN that could really step up and because they have some name brands that could make that run. Being able to capitalize on and promote it and share your message where people are getting their quick snippets of football news on Twitter, on Instagram, on Reddit, on TikTok, I guess. I would just love to see the SoCon be more active, and I think there's something to be said there. I mean, this is a great transition point. We're going to talk about the coaches and media's polls. Talking about social media, I've done the ASUN now, and I've done the Big Sky.
Big Sun.
Previews.
Hell, you never know what might happen, right? Hell, with the
merger.
Merger
alert,
you might have
breaking
just
news.
Scooped Matt Brown right there,
right?
But the Big Sun. The
Big Sun conference.
Beautiful.
The Big Sunland conference. There you go. Now we're getting real crazy. But
that's good. That's good.
Anyways, I was going through and on their news, they had no graphics for their coaches and media poll. So I ended up having to make one for our show here today where everybody else, I've just been able to grab their graphic and talk about it. So we're going to talk about the coaches and media polls, but here's the graphic that I had to spend an hour or so making because the SoCon doesn't have any social media presence. Here are your coaches and media polls. You can see they're pretty standard through the top five: Chattanooga, ETSU, Mercer, Furman, and West Carolina. And then you get your changes. You got Sanford coming in at six in the coaches, VMI at 7, the Citadel at 8, and Wofford at 9. If you go over to the media poll, it changes. VMI is 6, Sanford is 7, Wofford is 8, and the Citadel is 9. When you're looking at it, Chattanooga seemed to, in both polls, kind of run away with it, getting 5 votes in the coaches and 18 votes in the media compared to 2 votes for ETSU first in the coaches, 1 for Mercer, 1 for Furman. And then in the media, you had 7 for ETSU, 2 for Mercer. And I guess I should be said, the media poll on my screen is actually incorrect. There's a tie for second place. between Mercer and ETSU, 226 points. But, I mean, looking at this, is there a poll you like better between the coaches and the media?
Look, the coaches poll is always interesting, right? You know, when
it's not their job to pay attention, right?
Right. Let's call it the assistant SIDs poll, right? Which is basically what the coaches top 25 poll is during the season. Sometimes it's horrible, right? But look, the media poll is pretty solid. One of the two or whatever he said who voted ETSU to win it. And mostly it was because ETSU did against Kennesaw State in the playoffs exactly what Chattanooga has failed to do, which is try to stay in the game, never give up, don't fold, and they were able to pull that out in the end. Now the new coach kind of scares me a little bit in Johnson City.
Johnson City, Tennessee.
We have a fine affiliate there, WXSM, the Sports Monster. Those guys do a great job covering ETSU football. But look, I think ETSU probably wins the league. And after that, man, I don't think anybody knows exactly what's going to happen. Now, I will say this, that when you look at 6, 7, 8, and 9, these polls were taken before, the start of fall practice, and where there were a lot of transfers who are now on rosters who were not on rosters before. And now, those of us that know the league, we had some idea that these guys were coming into whatever school you talk about. But let's just take the Citadel, for instance. These polls were taken when nobody had any idea who the quarterback was going to be for the Citadel. And they bring in Peyton Derrick from Wofford, who has completed a lot of passes in college football and can hit open guys. And he's also well-versed in the triple because he was a guy Wofford brought in when they still ran that system. So the quarterback question in Charleston is solved. It's not going to be someone who's never taken a snap before. It's going to be a 5-year man graduate transfer. Citadel also brings in a B-back who's 240 pounds from SMU, a big old defensive lineman from Georgia Tech. These are the only type of transfers that the Citadel can take are graduate transfers. Wofford has no grad school. VMI has no grad school. So, that's not open to them. But with Furman, they brought in some guys too. But I think this is really a make it or break it type year for the Furman Paladins. They have been mediocre at best recently. And it was kind of shocking that the Paladins rewarded that mediocrity with a contract extension for Clay Hendricks. They must really like him. And he's a good coach. He was a very good coach, assistant coach at the Air Force Academy. He's an option guy, but, you don't really see a lot of that out of Furman. And I think that was because I don't think the Paladins wanted to run that. That's why he hired George Quarles to be the offensive coordinator. But like we mentioned, Chris, that offense really didn't set the world on fire. And Chattanooga, they've got quarterback questions. Will Copeland be the guy? They did bring in a transfer from either Central or Eastern Michigan. I always get those two mixed up. But he's not a big fella at all. So, it's tough for me to vote a team to win the league who doesn't really have any idea who's going to take the snaps. Yeah. So, East Tennessee State brings back Rydell, who, say what you like, I think he does need a haircut. I mean, but it's a beautiful mane of hair, dude. Let's say that. And he, was serviceable for ETSU. He didn't set the world on fire, but he's a winner. So, when you have a guy who's, taken a team to the playoffs, won a SoCon championship, yes, they do lose Quay Holmes at backfield, but it's real nice for them to have Jacob Sailors back there, who is also a guy who has a lot of experience running the ball for them and is an excellent receiver out of the backfield. So I think the reason why I picked ETSU to win the league, which is a popular pick as you read them out from the media, is because they have very few question marks at the positions that seem to matter the most. And a lot of teams in the league can't say that. Just like we discussed, I think this is also a year where, they're not going to fire Chronic if he doesn't win the conference or make the playoffs. He hasn't been there long enough. But that seat will be warmer for him if Mercer can't figure out a way, if they can't win the conference, to at least get to the playoffs.
Well, for full transparency to everybody, my internet's being annoying, so I kind of lost track of where we were, but hopefully we were right about this point if you're still listening. So, Kevin, I got a couple questions for you before we move on from the preseason polls. One is, who is, in your opinion, preseason-wise, the worst team and the best team in the conference? If you had to pick your 1 and your 9.
The worst team, look, that's a relative term, right? But I think it's got to be Wofford. And, man, that's really weird to say. It's really weird to think. But, they, move away from a system that made them who they were. And I understand why. I think a lot of people, including Village Terrier on Twitter, Joe James, thought that it limited them with how far they could go in the playoffs by running the triple option. Well, you move away from it and you haven't come close to making the playoffs since you moved away from it. So it's like, well, we can only advance so far, maybe the quarterfinals. Well, I mean, that's better than finishing in last place in SoCon.
Yeah.
And I think that if Wofford doesn't have a complete turnaround season, they make a change. There are people that really feel like they made a bad and very poor decision in their head coaching hire to replace the legend Mike Ayers, who we talked about before. The best team, I think, is ETSU. But you have an old hand, Randy Sanders, who, coached at the FBS level as an assistant for a lot of places, including Florida State and other big-time FBS programs. And you move to a fella who has never been a head coach in college, was a very successful high school coach. But high school ain't D1 football, Chris. I think we all know that. So, what happens during the chess match during the game? Does somebody like Kerwin Bell, who's, been a very successful head coach at the D2 level for a long time, does he carve somebody like that up, with adjustments and with just knowing? I mean, we'll see. But I think top ETSU, bottom Wofford. And I just want to say again how surreal it is to say that Wofford's probably the worst team in the SoCon. It's just, it's just odd. I mean, they beat the Citadel something like 19 years in a row.
I was gonna say, you kind of stole my second question. I was gonna say, so for most people that are maybe tuning in, checking it, they're gonna be really surprised to see Wofford at the bottom, because Wofford was a traditional team from the SoCon that went to the playoffs. Jamie Williams covered it when he was breaking down his 130 rankings. Having Wofford somewhere really low. And he's like, somebody was like, I forgot how far off Wofford has fallen. And, for people who haven't seen that episode, maybe this if they have, this puts it even more in perspective that they are being viewed as essentially one of, if not the worst team in the SoCon, which, as we've touched on, unfortunately, I think being a top tier team sometimes, or conference, do I think Wofford's actually worse than like most of the NEC, Patriot, or Pioneer League? No,
absolutely not. Right? No,
but they're getting ranked down there because of win-loss totals. Where we covered it, the gap between Wofford and, for instance, what you said, ETSU being the top, isn't as big as like the difference between, to put it in those terms, like Holy Cross and whoever's going to finish last, right? Like, those conferences have one team that's okay, and then the rest of that conference is usually pretty bad. But I mean, it is funny.
I used to call that league the Patsy League.
Yeah, it's sad to see Wofford
the Patsy
so
League,
low.
but not so much anymore. But yeah, you're right. It's extremely weird, to see that. And look, it doesn't surprise a lot of people to see, the two military schools in the SoCon, and the coaches poll be where they are, and then the media poll be where they are. But, look, if you want to know why VMI isn't picked to win the SoCon this year, just look no further than CAA Media Day when you see Reese Yadinsky and Jacob Harris, being, on Kreger's Peyton Award list at Richmond. No grad school. I mean, VMI lost a lot of dudes who have to leave the institute, or they have to spend an extra bit of time in that lifestyle. And believe me, VMI is a place that you want out of in as few semesters as you can possibly spend there and leave with a degree. And look, I know this is a SoCon show, but I was really shocked that Villanova was picked to win the CAA. I mean, you've got the two guys that basically led VMI from nowhere to a Southern Conference spring championship at Richmond, and they're probably going to do the same thing for the Spiders. But best team, worst team, I think those are the two that stand out to me, Chris.
Yeah. All right, so moving into the all-conference teams, and we're going to cover the MVPs as well here. Your offensive MVP is Jacob Sailors, senior running back for the Buccaneers, and your defensive MVP is, Devon Shaw Maxwell, defensive lineman, senior from UT Chattanooga. Any complaints on these two being selected as your preseason players of the year?
I mean, not really. I think you can make a case for Stone Snyder from VMI, the linebacker, to be the defensive player of the year. But look, he's not a guy who is probably going to be on anybody's draft board. I think he's probably the best I've seen for him is preferred free agent type guy. Maxwell will be a draft pick. And I think that Sailors, Quay Holmes left East Tennessee State to enter the draft, had another year, decided not to take it, and then wasn't drafted. So I think maybe, that's a regret there. But Sailors can do it all. He can run it outside. He can run over you up the middle, catch the ball out of the backfield. He's a solid choice. Although, in how many other conferences are where the offensive player of the year preseason isn't a quarterback? And I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to see shake out in the SoCon this year is who are the top QBs going to be. But and if you're going to give it to Sailors, I mean, you just as easily could have given it to Alim Ford from Chattanooga, who is an excellent back from Florence, South Carolina. And I only know that because that's where my daddy was from. So, but Lim Ford, great player for Chattanooga. But there's one person
1,000-yard rusher, right?
Right. And there's one person who's not listed on any of these lists, which I kind of found to be a little strange. But, thinking back on it, maybe not so much. But there is a former SoCon Offensive Player of the Year who is still in the league, and his name is Alex Ramsey. And Alex Ramsey set the world on fire running the ball for VMI. And he pulled the extremely rare, I think it's unprecedented, undergraduate at VMI, transfer to the Citadel as a graduate student. He's going to be a B-back for the Citadel. I don't know whether he'll be 100% healthy to start the year. I think Coach Thompson said he'd like to have him back for the first game, but don't be shocked if it's the second, the third, or the fourth game that he's back. But he is a former Southern Conference Offensive Player of the Year, and he's a stud. So, maybe if he comes back and plays the entire season, you might see him up there by the end of the year. But I think that if you asked me about Maxwell, great player, defensive lineman, big body. He eats up blockers. But I think that if you ask me who is the best defensive player in the SoCon, I'd have to say Stone Snyder from VMI. But he's not a can't miss NFL prospect, which a lot of people think Maxwell is.
Yeah. So looking at the first and second teams, is there anybody on these lists you think, I don't know if snub's the right word, but like if there was an extra spot, they would have gotten it?
Not really.
It's a good list then.
Yeah, it's a very good list. But then you look at it and you say, it's difficult to look at a team that runs the ball 90% of the time and they don't have anybody who, runs the football on the list, and look, I'm a Citadel homer. Everybody knows that, but Cooper Wallace could have easily been there. But the problem with the triple is that you're not going to get 20 carries a game. They're going to spread those 20 carries within 3 guys. So, but I really like the fact that there is some, diversity in the systems. When you look at that second team offense between Western Carolina, who throws it all the time, the Citadel, who runs it all the time, ETSU, who does a little bit of both, Chattanooga, who does a little bit of both. And I think it's just very difficult in this league where you have so many teams running so many systems to say, well, this guy's great at this, but he's not so good at this. He can run block his butt off, but pass blocking isn't his forte. So especially on the offensive line list, I think that's a really difficult thing to try to put together, because you're going to face somebody in our league each week who does something completely different.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to move on to the big games. And we kind of made a joke about this when we were covering up with the outline. And I think you nailed it. Obviously, you have SoCon weekend. Some SoCon team is probably going to at least be competitive, not surprise one of the ACC or SEC teams. But otherwise, in conference, what's your big games?
Everybody versus Mercer. This is their year, I think, to prove that they are what a lot of people think they could have been the last, 2 or 3 seasons. So, Mercer needs to start off quickly. I think we'll learn a lot about the SoCon. That's the thing about this league that is really interesting to me, is that when you look at the first 1 or 2, 3 ball games in a lot of leagues, you don't see a lot of conference matchups. The SoCon, you do, so we'll learn a lot about a lot of teams extremely early. Chattanooga plays Wofford week 1. Is Wofford going to be any good? Is Chattanooga going to have their quarterback situation figured out? If I'm Wofford, man, if I got to play Chat, I want to play them week 1. When I know who I am, they're still trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
We'll learn a lot about the Citadel in the first 2 weeks. They go on the road to Campbell, who has had just gigantic explosions in recruiting. But are those guys ready to play? Most of them probably not. And they're going to face a offensive system Campbell hasn't ever seen since they've been back to playing football there. And then in week 2, East Tennessee State comes to Charleston. Yeah. So, it's we're going to learn a lot real early. And you don't really see that in a lot of leagues in FCS. A lot of times they're playing their FBS game in the Big Sky or the Missouri Valley week 1, week 2, week 3. So, it takes a while for things to shake out in that league. The SoCon, we're going to know a lot in the first month of the season. And I think that we're going to look at these preseason ranking lists from the coaches and from the media. And I think just maybe we're going to look at that and go, wow, what were those guys thinking?
Yeah.
So we'll see. But, of course, East Tennessee State and Chattanooga, big game. Those two don't really like one another. There's in a league that is as ancient as the SoCon is, it's weird that you have teams that are, trying to start now playing for a trophy. ETSU and Western Carolina are not all that far apart. So, Chattanooga and and ETSU are. It's a ways from Chattanooga to Johnson City, right?
Johnson City, Tennessee.
But, you have teams that have been in the league a long time. I'm just waiting to see who Mercer's rival is going to be. They're a team where if you're the Citadel or Furman or Walford or VMI, that's just another team, because your rivalry dance card has been full for 50 years, or longer than that in some cases. So, but big games, everybody versus Mercer, the Tennessee schools matching up, the Military Classic of the South is always a huge game. And again, huge homer, I admit it, but it's the most unique game in all of FCS. It just is. And I often say, about the Citadel Furman game, it's a huge rivalry too, that you have a nice rivalry in other places in the FCS, but it's not really a rivalry until there's been roadside mascot murder, which has happened in the Citadel Furman rivalry. Pat Conroy made about 40 pages of one of his novels about that. So, this league is full of teams that you don't want to play on Saturday. You know what you're going to get out of a lot of them, even if they aren't particularly good. Man, they're going to hit you in the mouth, and they're going to continue to do it. And the SoCon is a really good league. It's a league that's strong from top to bottom. Do I wish that we would have followed the Big Sky model a little bit, maybe added 2 or 3 more teams to make it easier for us to put 3, 4, perhaps 5 teams in the playoffs? I mean, the part of me that loves SoCon and wants to see it succeed says yes. The part of me that enjoys the fact that everybody in it is tough, physical, and can beat anybody says no. We crown a true champion. And there is a very good post that the Reddit FCS guys put out there, and they don't like us much, and that's all right. That's fine. But they pointed out Weber State's schedule, and they said, man, Weber State, gauntlet in conference. They play all of the top half teams and Portland State, who beat them last year. And my response was, wow, it's almost like they play in a real conference, where they have to play every team in the top half of the league, So I like that. But is it the best way to, try to get to that, how many semifinals have you made argument that a lot of people like to make? Is it the best way to get there? No. But is it the best way that the SoCon knows how to do it? And people in the South in general really like the fact that you see the same teams every year, and they know you extremely well. And it's just a matter of 4 or 5 plays in each game that separates who wins the league from who finishes 6th.
Yep.
And I mean, that's a beautiful thing.
And using the Big Sky comparison, it's no secret that depending on the fan base you ask, but most of, let's say, the more like-minded institutions are on the page of they would rather have a SoCon model, where like some of the more recent additions, we have said the Big Sky's biggest problem is our size. Now, conference realignment terms, it's not, because you can lose to Southern Utah and still be, not scrambling to fill a roster like maybe the WAC is now. But so there's that safety in numbers. But then, like you mentioned, every year we talk about how annoying it is in the Big Sky that, like, oh, well, this year's going to be Montana's year because Montana State and Weber have a gauntlet schedule where Montana has a cupcake schedule. It's like, not saying that's the case this year, right? But it's like every year there's some team that's like Eastern Washington has to play all the top 5 teams, 4 of which on the road. And you're like, yikes. And then it's like, and then Weber State plays all the bottom teams, Idaho State, it's like, so I get it where it's like, it's nice to have that round robin. I think more people want to go to that. But then you touched on it. Who knows? Another video plug. We did is there room for a G5, P5, or G5 top of the FCS merger? Maybe App State, Georgia Southern coming back. Then you got that Mercer rivalry. Get a little GATA and a little Mercer going.
Right. And,
you guys would take them back in a heartbeat, I imagine.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
If App State, if there was a reshuffling of the deck, App State, Georgia Southern back, that would be I mean,
Yeah.
chef's kiss. SoCon
Well,
would be
look,
perfect.
this is the first year in a long time where Citadel plays App State. That's the FBS game this year. You know,
Yeah.
it's not Alabama. It's not Clemson. It's not Florida State, you know, who they've played in it's not South Carolina. It's App State in Boone. And I think a lot of people forget, and we touched on it the last time you had me on, Chris, that the last couple of years of App State and Georgia Southern and the SoCon were not good years for them. They did,
Yeah.
you know, they weren't eligible for the playoffs. They weren't eligible for the conference championship. It didn't matter because they couldn't sniff fourth place.
Yeah.
You know, but then they go to the Sun Belt in their first year and they're 2-3 or 1-2, I forget, in that league.
Yeah.
And they weren't eligible then either, right? So it's, yes, if that switch happens, man, it'd be super. Because look, I said it in, I think, one of your threads on Twitter about the Blue Bloods deal. I said they were Marshall, and then no one ever heard from them again. Right?
Yeah.
If that thing to happen and Appy, Georgia Southern, and Marshall want to come back and we do a G5 and FCS merger, man, you want to talk about? I would look like Jackie Moon discussing that merger, bro. Merger! I'm the smartest man alive, you know, that type of deal. But dude, if you're listening to this and you take one thing away, when you are putting a top 25 poll together, or you're looking at, who are the teams that I ought to keep an eye on. Well, there's 4 or 5 teams, 6 teams in the SoCon that can beat anybody in this country, sans a couple who nobody else can seem to beat anyway.
Mm-hmm.
On any Thursday, Friday, or Saturday in college football. And that's a beautiful thing. And I love the league. It's been a part of my life since I can remember. And I want to see the league do well. I want the leadership to do the things that need to be done to get us back to the level that it once was. And just like I've said several times, on the social media, the PR front, Jim Schaus, if you're watching, and I know you are, please just do whatever Tom Wistersill and his boys and John Casper are doing, and then do that. And if you do that, man, we'll be talking about a SoCon renaissance in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I would love to see the SoCon get back to its rightful place as one of the top conferences in the FCS. I mean, there's so much history in that conference. It's a shame that they're only getting one in now. And I think we touched on there's some ways they can improve that at the conference office as well as teams on the field. And I do think this is a conference that's going to be on the rise with, like I said, the CAA power vacuum happening. So hopefully that's the case. Kevin, I want to thank you for joining me and staying through 2 internet drops.
I was afraid it was going to be me, 7 miles in the middle of nowhere in Montana.
Yeah, I don't even know what it is. They're installing fiber optic outside. So I'm assuming maybe that's what's causing my actual non-fiber optic internet to be an issue. They keep saying sign up. It's going to be ready in 2 years. I'm like, no, I just want my regular internet to work now.
Right.
Let me know when the fiber's done. But apparently
you can just give Elon your money, and then you'll get
Musk,
Starlink,
not the team,
sometime. Right. Yeah. Not that team that the SoCon didn't want anymore and said, go ahead, take them, CAA.
So Kevin, how can most people find you if they want to keep up with you?
Look, man, the best way is, the show will start back up again on the 27th of August. And, we'd really appreciate it if you're in one of the cities that runs the show. If you listen to it on the radio, that helps us a lot. We are going to do a little bit better of a job of, getting the podcast out a little earlier in the week. For the longest time, it was, we're a radio show, and it was just, I don't want to put it out too early because we want you to listen on the radio. The podcast will be out there wherever you can find it. And, follow us on Twitter at FCS Nation Radio and the number 1. And look, I just want to congratulate you and Kyler and Jamie and Matthew and, all the guys from FCS Fans Nation. Reaching 1,000 subscribers on YouTube is huge. That that allows you to get a little cha-ching, right? And that's a good thing. Y'all do a great job. I'm always happy to come on with you, Chris. One of the best things that's happened in my FCS fandom, in the last 3 or 4 years is, the 15 minutes you and I spent together, crowded together at that place in Frisco, trying to see who could drink the most SoCon kamikazes right after one another. And I really appreciated that time. It's really good to meet you in person. And look, that's one of the things. I'm not much of a scribbler, but I wrote an article for Red Shirt Sports about why you should come to Frisco, even if your team isn't in it. And, what's happened down there the last 2, 3, 4 years has been tremendous with, people that you only knew of. Now we know. And that's really cool, man, especially as small of a tribe as FCS fans are. So I really appreciate you, Chris. Appreciate the guys. Thank you.
I know we've been preaching that forever. Like, just go. It's fun. You know where it's going to be every year. If you buy it before you know the teams, like, tickets aren't that bad, flights aren't that bad, Airbnbs aren't that bad, and it's like it becomes an issue when, like, you're a Montana State or South Dakota State fan and your team finally makes it, and you've got 3 weeks notice to book all that. That's when people are like, "Oh, it's just too expensive." I'm like, "Look, tickets go on sale, I think, in a week." It's usually like the first Monday in August, so we're coming right up on it.
Drinking beer in the press box, though.
Yeah, no, I heard that's frowned upon. I got an email about that. I don't know who it was.
Yeah.
Wasn't me.
Well, my advice would be what one of the other Montana media guys who was there said. If you don't want people doing that, maybe don't put them in a bar to view the game. And there you go. But thanks for having me, Chris. Really appreciate it, buddy.
Anyways, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, wherever you found it, in podcast or YouTube form. Kevin mentioned it. We're still trying to grow the subs because it allows us to do more and more content. So smash the sub, give it a like, comment down below who you think is going to win the SoCon conference and what conference you want previewed next. Hey, thank you guys so much for making it to the end of this video. Us here at FCS Fans Nation Network are pushing 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube page. We really want to get there. If you've made it this far, you might as well hit the subscribe button in the middle of the screen or down below. We would really appreciate it. And while you're at it, there's a couple other videos up on the screen. Might as well give them a listen too. You don't know who else on the network you'll like.